Today, we're diving into the incredible ripple effects from the 17th and 18th centuries. This was a time when brand new philosophical ideas didn't just question faith, they shook it to its very foundations. It was, without a doubt, an age of profound intellectual crisis, but it was also an age of a powerful, thoughtful Christian response.
So, this is the central question we're really exploring. And you have to understand, for the people living through this was not just some abstract debate for a classroom. Not at all. As we're about to see, with Europe literally tearing itself apart of religion, finding a firm foundation for truth, well, it felt like a matter of life and death. You see, the backdrop to this whole intellectual drama was just violence and chaos. You had the 30 Years' War on the continent, the English Civil War. These were brutal, horrific conflicts fought over religion and power. And all that turmoil fueled this widespread crisis of certainty and a desperate, desperate quest for answers that could rise above all the bloodshed. Okay, so let's jump right in. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to start with the challenge that really set the stage. Then we'll look at three major responses: Hobbes's pretty radical political solution, deism's intellectual assault, and then finally, Christianity's own rational defense. And to wrap it all up, we'll see what this all means for your ministry today. The source material we're looking at describes the skepticism and rationalism of this era perfectly. It says they were like stones dropped into a pond which sent out ever-widening ripples. The old authorities, both the church and the state, they were losing their grip. And in that vacuum, people were searching, just desperately searching for a new, more certain foundation for knowledge and for society itself. So the first major response we're going to look at came from an English thinker named Thomas Hobbes. He offered a solution that was, frankly, breathtaking in its scope. It was a complete reimagining of society based on a pretty grim view of humanity and a radical form of materialism. Hobbes was a man who was profoundly shaped by the conflict of his time. He even said he was born prematurely because his mother was so terrified as the Spanish Armada approached England. And that sense of fear, that ever-present threat of chaos, it really informed his entire philosophy. You see, he wasn't just thinking in abstractions, he was trying to build a system that could stop society from collapsing into violence. And this right here, this is the bedrock of his thinking. For Hobbes, humanity's natural state, without a powerful government to keep us all in check, is just a state of perpetual war. It's a deeply pessimistic view of human nature, for sure, but it's the essential starting point for understanding the extreme solution he came up with. So his logic kind of unfolds like this. The problem is chaos. The goal is just survival, and the only way to get there is for everyone to agree to a social contract, to basically surrender their freedoms to an absolute sovereign. He called this sovereign state the Leviathan in his famous book, yes, named after the great beast in Job. And what's really fascinating here is the result. This all-powerful state gets to dictate everything, and I mean everything, even public religion. For Hobbes, the only way to stop religious wars was to subordinate religion entirely to the power of the state. It's an idea whose echoes we can still see today in any political theory that prioritizes state control over individual conscience. Okay, now let's move on and look at a different kind of challenge. Deism, well, it wasn't a political program like Hobbes's. It was a much more subtle intellectual movement. It didn't want to subordinate Christianity to the state, it wanted to redefine it by stripping it of its supernatural core, all in the name of reason. This classic definition from Dr. Samuel Johnson really gets right to the point. Deists believed in a creator god, sure, kind of like a great divine clockmaker who set the universe in motion and then just stepped back. But they completely rejected the idea that this god had intervened in history through special revelation. So no prophets, no scripture, no miracle. The attack really started with Lord Herbert, who's often called the father of English deism. He argued that all the religious truths you really need, like the existence of God, the need for virtue, were just common notions that any rational person could figure out on their own. The implication was crystal clear. If reason is enough, who needs the Bible? Then the challenge got more specific, and honestly, more aggressive. Anthony Collins took aim at one of the key pillars of Christian apologetics, fulfilled prophecy. He argued that the Old Testament prophecies quoted in the New Testament weren't supernatural predictions at all. No, they were just interpreted allegorically by the gospel writers. He was trying to completely cut the cord between the Old and New Testaments. And this is where the deist attack hit its peak. Thomas Woolston didn't just question the evidence for the resurrection, he openly mocked it. He called it a blatant fraud, an imposture. This was a direct, head-on assault on the central, non-negotiable event of the entire Christian faith.
Now, here's what's so fascinating. How did Christian thinkers respond? Well, they didn't retreat from reason in the face of these attacks. Not at all. Instead, they doubled down. They used the very tools of logic and evidence to build a powerful, rational defense of orthodox Christian belief. And this chart illustrates the fundamental divide perfectly. For the deists, reason stood in judgment over revelation, rejecting anything it couldn't fully wrap its head around. But for Christian thinkers, like this group of philosophers at Cambridge known as the Cambridge Platonists, reason was the candle of the Lord. It was a divine gift given to us by God to help us understand his revelation. It wasn't a replacement for faith, it was a partner to it. The Christian response was so creative and multifaceted. This slide shows 3 great examples. First, you have Bishop Thomas Sherlock, who took a legal approach. He wrote this popular book that staged a mock trial, putting the witnesses to the resurrection on the stand and arguing that their testimony held up by legal standards. Then there's the brilliant philosopher Joseph Butler, who made these sophisticated arguments based not on absolute certainty, but on probability. And finally, you have figures like the composer Handel and the preacher John Wesley. They understood that skepticism isn't just an intellectual problem. It has to be answered with a powerful appeal to the heart and soul, too. This quote right here gets to the absolute core of Bishop Butler's argument. You see, the deists were demanding a kind of absolute, almost mathematical proof for faith, a standard we don't apply to anything else in our lives. Butler masterfully pointed out that for us, as finite human beings, probability is the very guide to life. We make all our most important decisions in law, in science, in our personal lives by weighing evidence and probabilities, not by demanding absolute certainty. So, he argued, a faith based on a strong convergence of probable evidence is entirely reasonable. So let's bring this all home. Why should you, as a pastor or a theologian preparing for ministry in 21st century Nigeria, care about these old English debates? Well, because the ideas that powered these conflicts, they didn't just disappear, they evolved. And their assumptions are still deeply, deeply embedded in the modern world you will be ministering in. Just think about these assumptions for a second. These were the core principles of deism, right? But they have become the foundational principles for so much of modern biblical criticism and secular history. This idea that you must explain everything in the Bible without any recourse to the supernatural, that is a direct inheritance from the deists. As ministers, as scholars, you will encounter this mindset constantly. But the good news is that the defenders of the faith gave us tools that are just as relevant today. You can absolutely use Sherlock's method. Treat the Gospels as eyewitness testimony and argue for their reliability. You can use Butler's insight. Show people that faith isn't some blind leap in the dark, but a reasonable trust based on good evidence. And this is crucial, you must always remember Wesley's focus. Our apologetics have to connect with people's hearts and be demonstrated in a transformed life. So I'm going to leave you with this challenge. The forms have changed, but the underlying ideas, they persist. What are the modern philosophies of materialism, the Leviathans, that demand our ultimate allegiance today? What are the modern deisms that offer a comfortable, reasonable spirituality, but strip it of the supernatural power of the gospel? Identifying them is the first step. Preparing a robust, thoughtful, and heartfelt response, well, that is the great task of your ministry.